Hey, pushers, it's Mr. Naimatsu here, coming with your first real lesson on how to write a DBQ. Last lesson, we kind of reviewed this lesson plan and all the resources, and kind of discussed a little bit about the rubric that you'll be graded upon. One thing I failed to mention on the last time is I do have recommended dates of completion. Remember that this course you can learn at your own pace, but just as an idea, it's recommended that you complete these items on this given date. Obviously, as we come to the end of the close of a grading period, we will have to either turn those things in, or unfortunately, we'll get zeros for those. So please turn them in as you can. But if you can't make that recommended time, that's a-okay. Today, we're going to really start just actually look at the DBQ. I'll be using Cami that I assigned through Schoology for you guys, so that you can follow along with the way in which I mark items. Obviously, this can be done by hand as well. So if you're a person that doesn't really enjoy the Cami experience, you can do it by hand as well. But this is just a better way for me to show it. That way I can use the screen. We'll also be taking a look at the outline worksheet, which will really help guide you along the way. This is something I created last year when this course was online and the test was online as well, as a way for students to kind of gather their information. And so since course is being put online, I have this kind of this worksheet, this outline worksheet that I think will help you out. Of course, you can always print those and do that by hand as well. So a lot of opportunities. If you are doing it by hand, you can simply take pictures and upload those to Schoology. In addition to your items, you guys can copy and paste those into the actual document. You can email me, let me know. So multiple ways in which, if you want to not use these electronic resources, you can, but I'll be using them just to guide things along. So the two things that we're going to be focused on is the actual DBQ itself. We're going to be using Cami on there, and then also the outlining worksheet. Okay. So the first thing is that this is a 2017 DBQ. Even since 2017, we've actually had a couple of changes on the DBQ. So unfortunately, this DBQ has some information that's irrelevant. For instance, the use of the word synthesis here, and the idea of periodization, which is shown here. These type of skills are not actually tested anymore. The reason I still use the 2017 DBQ is because College Board releases very few of the actual free response questions, and these are the most recent ones. And so I want to use the most recent ones to kind of get an idea of what the test is going to be like. So although it's not perfect, it's better than a lot of the other ones that we have out there. Just to kind of review what a DBQ is, some of you guys are brand new to this class. It's called a document-based questions. Basically, you're going to get a series of 7 documents. And with those 7 documents, you're going to analyze what they're saying in the documents and construct some kind of argument. And that argument needs to respond to the prompt, right? So it's a historical argument. Think of yourself being a textbook, a writer of a textbook, and you're trying to tell students a certain story, a certain idea. You're trying to explain a certain part of history, and that is what our job is going to be. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the drawing tool here, in which I kind of use it as a pencil. So in our geography class, and probably in last year's class in AP Euro, you may have learned some marking strategies to mark up a prompt. I'm going to go ahead and use those. So here I see something called a directive verb, right? Evaluate. So evaluate the extent, and I use circles to kind of focus on things. Religious ideas, and also the extent to which is also a very important thing. So I'm going to underline that. Of the Second Great Awakening and how it shaped the reform movements. And then we actually box the time period, so first half of the 19th century. So I like to go ahead and mark these items. I'm going to actually add another little bit more of an underline, because shaped, right? It's kind of like the word influence. And so this is how, using your pencil, I would actually physically mark this in class. But it's kind of showing you using Cami and using this DBQ what it looks like, right? So when students this is probably the most critical part of the test, and students often just move on and start wanting to go into documents, but they really don't know what the question is asking. And so I'm going to break this down, but I see a total of 3 different questions being asked. And in the writing worksheet, it'll ask you to slow down and break this down as well. And especially on the test, this 30 seconds to 1 minute is a very critical 30 seconds to 1 minute, because if you construct a whole essay and it's not on prompt, then you're going to lose all the points. So we really want to make sure we understand what the question is asking us to do. So evaluate means to test. The extent to which means like how far and how much into the degree, right? So like how much this stuff is going down, how much religious ideas of the Second Great Awakening actually shaped, I'm going to use the word influence, or changed the reform movements of the first half of the 19th century. So I see kind of 3 different things. We got to first figure out what is the religious idea or the reform movement that's being shown here, and how do they relate to one another in each document, and how successful was the Second Great Awakening in actually creating that reform movement. Did the reform movement actually succeed due to the influence of Second Great Awakening, or did it not? And that's kind of that degree to which, this extent to which. So those are the 3 questions I'm going to be asking in my head every time I read the document, and that's what's going to be happening in your brain. And that's why this is a critical thing. Not only going to be reading a document to figure out what it's saying, but at the same time, you're going to be trying to use the evidence in the document to construct a response. And you'll see that in the next coming videos as we go from document to document. So let's go ahead and take a look at our outline worksheet and kind of focus on the prompt. And the prompt is asking you a couple of things. Number one, to write this in one way, you can say identify the religious idea. It's the first thing it's kind of asking us to do. Or you can put it a lot easier, what was the religious idea in the passage? Right? We know this is about the Second Great Awakening, so most likely there's going to be some kind of religious idea of the Second Great Awakening in the passage. The second thing is now to identify the reform movement, right? Identify the reform movement. What was the reform movement? Isn't there a way that you can say that instead of saying the word identify, right? So that's the second question asked. Is the reform movement in there? And now it may not be very clear. We may have to assume it, right? And so we'll figure that out again as we get into each document, which we are going to have an opportunity to do so. The last thing is, and this is where a really nuanced argument would come in, and this is what separate, throughout this essay, I'm going to be talking about the basic or advanced type of an essay, and this separates the basic and advanced. An advanced essay will definitely articulate this last question, which is this: test the degree of influence, right? And that's the word evaluate. And so many guys are like, what does that mean? And in a lot, either way, and I'm trying to show you both ways, right? Or you can put it into a little bit easier question. But how influential was the Second Great Awakening? I'll put GA to make it easier, on the reform movement. And then on the day of the test, if you don't write these down, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to be there and over your shoulder, but I want to stress the point of this, that sometimes marks helps us see the question and helps us understand the question, and to slow down. These questions are often more complex. Here we have one sentence, but there's actually 3 different things that we're having to do within these documents that we'll be asking ourselves. And so that's what I really want to emphasize for you today. Slow down, make sure you understand the question, and break down the question into more than just one different idea. There's always going to be at least 2, and in most cases 3. Okay, that's what separates that advanced thesis or not. The second thing that you have to do is when you see this, the second opportunity right now, without even reading the documents, is to actually start brainstorming some stuff that you know about the Second Great Awakening. You guys can see up here on the tab, I kind of cheated, right? I kind of took a look at Wikipedia, and that's okay to do so. So let's go ahead and talk about contextualization right now. And actually, let's go ahead and go back to our rubric and discuss this for just 1 second. So if you look at my DBQ rubric, you'll notice that I will be judging your thesis and contextualization, but we're already at a point where we can start creating answers, creating key terms, start brainstorming, and making sure that we start getting this point for contextualization. Contextualization in this essay will be the sentences before your thesis that help introduce the idea, the main idea of the prompt. I think we would all agree that the main idea of the prompt most likely would be the Second Great Awakening. So in this case, we're going to talk about the events that led up to the Second Great Awakening. all right? Or led up to the argument inside there. It could be also the reform movements or the specific religious ideas, which obviously is part of the Second Great Awakening. When we talk about contextualization, the big thing that I see from students that separates a student from not getting a point over here, and again, if you don't know understand this rubric, please go back to this original lesson. I'll go ahead and show you back. But if you can click this lesson video, I'm really going to go through those rubrics a little bit more. But the reason why a student would not get a point here and the students get points over here is usually there's not enough historical key terms. We're looking for about 3 for our prior to, so 3 sentences in our prior to sentences and 3 in our while. And some of you guys are saying, what are you talking about with prior to and while? Our first 3 sentences, our first sentence of the essay is going to actually, our introduction is going to begin with the words prior to, and then you're going to have 3 sentences after that, and then you're going to have the word while, and you have 3 more sentences. We'll teach you how to go ahead and write this when we get there to the introduction and writing the thesis, which will be a few lessons from now. But for right now, what you need to understand is that I'm looking for a total of 6 key terms, and these 6 key terms need to be adequately explained inside of the introduction. That led up to, in this case, the Second Great Awakening, or whatever the major event is in the prompt or in the question. What separates a student from another thing other than just the fact that they don't have enough historical key terms, a student may stay in this area, which is this this basic, this 6-point area, this yellow area, and not move to this green or this blue area because of what I call multiple gaps. And you can see it right here for number 3. What I mean by multiple gaps is like you might go back so far in history and you don't really aren't linking the causes, the effects, the chain of events that led up to that situation. So, for instance, let's talk about the American Revolution. If you were to do some poor contextualization about this, you may first talk about the French Indian War and then immediately go to the American Revolution. There was no time in which you talked about the taxes and the political rights that were being taken away from the colonists that resulted them in getting the American Revolution. So suddenly we went from French Indian War to the American Revolution, and we missed kind of the conversation about taxes and political pressure that the British Crown was putting on the colonies. That would be a gap. Sometimes there are gaps, but it's not nearly as large, and so it doesn't distract me from understanding what you're trying to do. And lastly, a student that meets it over here would have a lot of key terms, really richly developed, and they flow from one event to another very seamlessly without one of these what we call major gaps. Remind yourself that on the test, they grade a 1 or a 0, and I talk to students every year about this, on how difficult it must be for a reader to figure out if this contextualization gets a point or not. If they only had 4 key terms and they have gaps, what is going on in the brain of a reader? This test is new. It's going on to its 3rd now revision in 5 years. And so I think they're still learning as to what exactly they're expecting from students and teachers. So that's why I created this type of a model where we kind of put it, like I said in an earlier video, more in the spectrum. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're looking for. So after doing a little bit of review on the Great Awakening, and that's okay to do so, right? I mean, this is all the way back at the beginning of the year, and so we need to take a couple moments to go ahead and review some items, and that's what this DBQ lesson plan is for, and why we're starting with an item all the way back in period 4 so we can do some reviews of even period 3. So I'm going to go ahead and list down some key terms that happened prior to the Second Great Awakening, which would be the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s-ish kind of area. And discuss, kind of lead us through, and I'll show you how it's kind of going from one to another. Again, we're not writing the essay, we're just outlining our thoughts here. So one thing I remember is that we were definitely religious in the North, especially with colonies. Notice I'm going all the way back to the 1600s, theoretically. I remember that there was a First Great Awakening, and that First Great Awakening, a famous guy was Jonathan Edwards. I remember that. Jonathan Edwards is a famous preacher. I remember that the Second Great Awakening was a reaction to the Enlightenment. of this kind of structured view of religion and spirituality, almost God being a time maker. He simply created time and walked away, not really a part of our lives. And this is a fervent reaction by the Second Great Awakening. So it's a reaction of light, enlightenment, and science and ration. I remember it being lined up with my AP European history of the Romantic view. So it's more of emotional, romantic view of religion, and especially in Christianity. Notice I'm already explaining it. So, I always tell students the last key term definitely should mention what one of the arguments inside of the Second Great Awakening. Now you kind of weaved it right into your thesis, right? So in this case, it's the Reform movements. I'm going to talk about how the Second Great Awakening was appealing to the masses. I remember conversations about the Second Great Awakening. The African American preachers showed up, women preachers showed up, right? Was appealing to mass and democratized religion, right? Gave religion to the people. Okay, I guess democratize isn't a word, but it is. We'll go ahead and change it right here. So we're done. We're done for this first activity, and we're already seeing the 6 to 7 sentences that are going to be the first part of our introduction. We're not going to be able to write a thesis right now because a thesis we won't know until we actually analyze all the documents and the evidence in the document. So that's what we'll be doing in our next video. But in this video, what did we do? Just as a quick review, we looked at the prompt. We identified the prompt. After identifying the prompt, we went ahead and broke down the prompt. And after breaking down the prompt and being clear about what it's asking, and also being clear about the most important key term, which is the Second Great Awakening, we provided some historical information. This information does need to come from your brain. Hopefully through review, we can name a couple of things. Students say, what if I only remember 1 and 1? Hey, 1 and 1 is a lot better than none and none, right? So, that's one thing. Some other students would always ask this, hey, Mr. Imatsu, isn't this outside information? And you're absolutely correct. It is outside information. None of this information may be on the DBQs. It's coming from our own brain. And they would say, okay, I remember there's a DBQ point. If you were to look at the rubric, and I actually have it here, on evidence beyond, it's outside historical evidence beyond the documents. You can't double dip this point. So this point usually is found in your body paragraph and usually an extension of an argument where you bring in another person, another idea, another actor that helps it. So this is outside information, but you will gain points for contextualization. So if we're able on the day of the test, think about 3 to 4 key terms for each of these things and weave these things together articulately, you are well on your way to getting a point. If you can only remember 2 or 3 and you still kind of weave them together, I think you're still onto a point. You don't have much, don't have any, or make historical errors, or there's massive gaps in your thinking, I don't know if you get a point. So hopefully we understand how to mark a prompt right here, how to break down a prompt so that we know what it's saying, and lastly, how to contextualize or start brainstorming some ideas that will later become the beginning of our introduction to get the contextualization point for the DBQ. So earlier I said, hey, all we're looking for is 3 to 4 points. If we can do this, this is point number 1, guys. We're well on our way. We're a third of our way, and we haven't read 1 document. So hopefully we're going to see with a little bit of focus, a little bit of understanding of how this test game is played, you guys are going to be very successful on the test, and this writing will become a lot easier. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one. Next one, we're going to get a little bit more difficult. We're going to get down and dirty into the documents and discuss the reasons why we do 4 or 6 documents. All right, guys, see you on the next one. All right, take care. Bye.